Hello and welcome to Brax will let you know, one voice at a time. Today I have a very special guest. You mind introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Melinda Messineo, and I am a teacher and a community activist.
Beautiful. Thank you. So today's quote is going to be a little bit about storytelling, and it reads, "It's important that we share our experiences with other people. Your story will heal you, and your story will heal someone else. When you tell your story, you free yourself and give other people permission to acknowledge their own story." The title of our segment today is What is Your Story? And today, Dr. Messineo is going to talk a little bit about her story as well as how you can formulate your own. So, uh, as normal, I always start off with the question of what does it mean to share your story?
So, Rexton, it's so nice to be here, and congratulations on your phenomenal show here. What does it mean to share your story? You know, it is so powerful to be known and to be heard. And I've had this great opportunity to participate in a storytelling activity. So, I'd love to start with just telling you my story, if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, we would love to hear it.
It's called, and it's a theme you may have seen in other contexts, but the general gist is, where am I from? So, I am from the pine scented mountains of Southern California, where the trees lift high into the sky, giving you hopes of all things possible and grounding you to remind me that my problems aren't as big as they may seem. I'm from the holiday tables that are laden with lasagna and cannoli and gaduna and those salty olives that my grandfather, my papa, would say, "I bet you can taste Sicily all the way from here." I'm from that wooden pew as we're sitting there in the midnight mass service, and we can smell the incense on the heavy laden air as the candles flicker in the light, and we are listening to the sisters' voices rise to the rafters, Ave, Ave, Ave. And I look to my side and I see my twin sister, and we grab hands, we lock gazes, and it is in that moment that I know, no matter where my story takes me, I will never be alone. My story.
I love that. So, how was the sort of, how do you sort of create that or like formulate like what you wanted to have in that? Was it a poem? I assume, correct?
Yeah, it's like a spoken poem story. And the idea is that when we are going through these workshops that I'm part of, our hope is to help people learn their own story. And we talk about it in the workshops as our own identity story, our own diversity story. And the important thing about understanding our own stories is it gives us insights into who we are. Because one of the things that we know is whenever you meet somebody for the very first time, you immediately read their story, right? And
Hmm.
it's not bad or good. It's just humans, right? You saw me on the screen for the first time and you read my story. And what we do is when we read each other's stories, we are forced by necessity to just read the phenotypical markers that we can see, right? So maybe you had a guess of my age or kind of an idea of what my race, ethnicity, or gender identity might be. But if you've ever misguessed somebody's age or thought about someone's race, ethnicity, you may realize that we often get those stories wrong. The other thing that we know about reading people's stories, basing it only on the cover that is available to us, we miss all of those parts of our identity, all those aspects of who we are that are kind of below the waterline of visibility, right? This idea that so much of what makes us who we are is unknown to others until they get to know us, right? Until they develop a trusting friendship, till we build a relationship. And one of the things that we know is, someone who has a story like mine, right? I have a very majority, very privileged story. So when people read me, they read my story with a lot of privilege, which is accurate in so many ways. But we also know that there's other stories in our culture, other people's stories being read with not very much privilege, not very much power within our society. And so we have to recognize that different stories are read very differently, and different stories are read very differently in different cultural contexts. You know, me hanging out with my friends versus me hanging out with a completely different group, that story is going to be read differently. So the other thing that we have to remember is that while everybody wants to have their story heard, they want to be authentically known, we would never want to put people in the position where they felt like they had to share their story before they were ready. Like, oh, tell me your story. Sometimes we ask people, tell me your story, as if we had a right to know it. And we want to make sure that we're remembering that people have full agency, full autonomy over the sharing and telling of their story. And that requires building trust, and that requires knowing your own story first. Because when I know my story first, when I understand where I'm coming from, I can understand possibly a lot of the ways in which I'm reading other people's stories. And if I think I have an idea how the story is going to end, and I might be wrong, I want to be cautious that I'm not making assumptions about who it is that I'm in front of and the story that I'm reading. So that's kind of the activity, that's the exercise. We encourage people to start with this idea of where am I from? And then we build through other parts of people's diversity stories, understanding their identity stories. And then the next part of it is understanding where our unexplored biases around reading stories, including our own, exist.
Yeah, I loved, and you talked a little bit about surface level identity. And I love how the poem opens up with sort of location,
Mm,
and it's sort of like the exterior, and then you sort of dive into your internal identity, like your twin sister, going to church, and like it becomes more internalized. And I love that because it's sort of like creating like this sphere of identity starting externally and then coming in. And I love that because that's essentially what storytelling, identity, and everything is. And I think that, and I love how you sort of say like knowing your story first. So doing that internal work and like figuring out who it is you are. And yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
thanks. I'm embarrassed or nervous to say it because you're such a great storyteller yourself. So
Oh, thank
I
you.
appreciate your saying that.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing. It's awesome to see. I don't know if people know, but Dr. Messineo was my professor during my times at Ball State. So it was nice seeing this or exploring this side of her. And that essentially is identity and storytelling. And I never seen you storytell in this sort of light. So it's nice. What is some advice you can give in terms of people who may not feel like they have a story to be shared or have a story that can be worthy of exploring?
Yeah, that's such a great question. In fact, if you had asked me before this activity, I would have said, well, I don't really have a story. My upbringing's kind of boring. You know, I don't really have any exotic experiences to
Mm,
put out there. And so, as we think about this identity activity that I just walked you through, we give individuals prompts how to think about their diversity story, their identity story. And they start with things like, you know, where were your grandparents and great grandparents from? What holidays did you celebrate growing up? What foods remind you of your youth?
mm,
Are there traditions that you've carried from your childhood into adulthood? If you ask the children of your extended family, your cousins, the people, you know, your kin, what would they say the family background is? And then that starts to tell a really rich story about where you came from and who you are. But so my academic home is sociology, and so if you look into each of those different prompts around your diversity story, around your identity story, you'll note that that talks a lot about culture and socioeconomic status and community and identity, and just knowing where someone's ancestors are from can speak volumes about what their experience here in the US could be like, right? And so, have we thought about our own backgrounds, how it shapes our sense of the world, how we think about, where is my place, and how our perceptions of our stories and our assumptions that other people have similar stories, or we think that we know how their story goes, um, shapes the way we think about them, how much empathy we give people, if we give people the benefit of the doubt. Braxton and I had an opportunity to work together with families who were navigating their path out of poverty, and when you're on the outside, looking at reading the stories of individuals who are, under resourced, if you have this sort of vision and this expectation of how the story ends, you're going to read their actions and their comments and their experiences very differently than you are within their story, right? And you're like, what if I were having this experience? And it completely shifts the lens, knowing where my story came in, where what my experience means, and then what their story is, what their experience means, and where they intersect, because that's what's important, right? Where do our stories come in contact with one another? And in this group that we worked with, we would have meals together every week, and across table and breaking bread together, we would share our stories. And getting to know individuals at that level shapes the way you think about them as individuals, but their broader context, right? There,
Mm-hmm.
you have more answers, you have more options, and you make fewer assumptions about, how this character got here and how this story will end. So it's really an important part of building empathy. We just recently had Random Acts of Kindness Week, and that as a country, we didn't invent it, right? It's a social movement, and the theme this year, one of the themes has been making kindness the norm.
Mm,
And one of the things about living kindness and random acts of kindness is giving people the benefit of the doubt and living with great empathy. And in order to be able to live with empathy, you have to be able to put yourself in a person's shoes, right? And
mm-hmm.
until you know your own shoes, it's hard to be in someone else's shoes, right? And finding the way that those stories intersect. So just a thought about how to think about your own story.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about, just briefly, about how what do you do once someone shares a story with you?
The
How
first
is
part
it?
about
Yeah.
a story and someone telling you a story is to actually listen to their story,
Mhm.
because one of the things that humans are so common to do, so likely to do, is as soon as you hear a story that resonates with you or reminds you of a story, you want to share your story, right? Like, oh,
Mhm.
you went canoeing? Oh, that's so amazing. I went canoeing, right? And while you're telling your story, I can't even hear your story because I can't wait for you to stop talking so I can say my story,
Mm,
which is very natural. It's about how people bond, it builds affinity, which is really important for social bonding and our mental health. Totally, totally important.
mhm.
But the first part is to really listen to a person, avoid the desire to interrupt and kind of one up their story.
Right.
So be with their story, listen to their story, and think about, well, what can I learn from their story? And it's good to think about where there's commonalities in their story, because that's, important for social bonding. But also where there's differences, and ask yourself, what else would I like to know? Like, I'm curious, listen and communicate your curiosity. Tell me more, like what happened next, or what are your hopes, what are your dreams, where do you want to go from there, like whatever it would make sense. Again, always making sure you're giving the author complete, agency over telling the story on their own terms, so that they don't feel like, oh, well, I'll let you in this way, but I didn't want to let you in this way,
Right.
so
Yeah.
they get to decide, which is hard. But I said this just a minute ago, people want to share their stories, people want to
Mhm.
be heard, they want to be known their authentic selves. They just want to trust that you're not going to judge them because of your
Right.
story, that you're not going to have expectations of them that are not you. And so that's the hard part about storytelling.
Yeah. And to just piggyback off a little bit, what I've been working on, is after someone story tells, or if I'm just talking to someone or they want to express how they're feeling emotionally. I try to, oh, I'm working on asking now, do you want me to be just a listening ear or would you like me to respond? And so that's been really a nice step back, because some people just need the ear and some people just need to express how they're feeling without that judgment or without that extra weight, essentially. So I think
Oh,
that's,
that's wonderful. Good for you.
no, I love how you started off with listening first, because I think that's super important. Because otherwise, what's the point of the story? But yeah, wow. Well, this is beautiful. As my last question for every interviewee, I always ask any advice or wisdom you wish to share.
One of the things I hope people think about with their stories is wherever you are in your life, embrace that moment in your stories, narrative or trajectory. I think a lot of times when we're young, we can't wait to be older, and then when we're older, we're very nostalgic about being young, and just really embracing the moment we're in right now. And I have a lot of colleagues who are, they're hesitant to be, whatever age they are right now, right? People don't want to say, where they are or what their age is or anything like this, because they are, bringing, society's judgment on themselves that there's something wrong with whatever that is, or, it could be body size or health or whatever these parts of our story that we're hesitant to embrace because we have these social expectations on us that we judge our own stories. And so I hope that people will, live your story, embrace your story wherever you are in that journey. And in that moment, you're like, this is my story now. And isn't this amazing? Or it could be, horribly difficult. I could be really, really struggling in a moment in time, but like, this is my story now, right? And what will I be learning from this struggle? And what am I to be learning from this joy? And how can I remember this joy in my next struggle? And note how I am able to feel this joy so much more intensely right now because of that struggle I had before. And possibly I will need this joy for struggles in the future, right? And so
Mhm.
being in those moments and embracing them in that time, I think gives us richer lives. So
Mm.
that would be my advice to others.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, it really brought me to the image of a book and like chapters that we are. And sometimes you may refer back to a chapter of what you learned, or some chapters are a bit more terrifying or like scary. And essentially, it's just taking a step back and figuring and knowing that we are we are essentially not multifaceted, but we we're a whole book, and there's going to
Yeah.
be little chapters, there's going to be sub chapters, subtopics, and that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, and I love your analogy too because it's like, well, I'm going to write a new chapter, right?
yeah,
Like I get to like write the next chapter. What will my next chapter be? Like,
yeah.
and a lot of times sometimes we didn't like how the last chapter ended, right? Okay, I'm
Hmm.
changing this plot line, we're
Right.
taking the story a different way or whatever. So I love that. I love that it fits in with all the other aspects. So great idea.
So write your book or your chapter today. um wow, I love that. So sharing your story, or if you, even if you don't want to share your story, just what is your story, who are you, and you shared a little bit about where are you from, um what are we, what are we, who are we, how are we, essentially. So thank you again.
Thank you so
Is
much.
there, of course, is there anything you want to promote or shout out?
I just want to do a shout out to all of the students at Ball State University who are working really, really hard, and to the Muncie community and all our partners and friends in the Muncie community. We're sending you our love. So thank you.
Always. Thank you. Once again, this was Brax Will Let You Know, where we are using the voices in this world for the change we need in the world. And once again, thank you, and we shall see you next time.
Thank you.